All right, let's get right into it. I want you to imagine a government, one that's been stuck in a political stalemate for almost 20 years, just collapsing, and not over months or weeks, but in a single weekend. This is the wild story of how two completely opposite groups in Nepal, a digital-savvy youth movement and a traditionalist cultural revival, somehow teamed up, almost by accident, to pull off the impossible.
You heard that right. 48 hours. Just think about that for a second. That's less time than most people spend on a weekend getaway. An entire political system that had seemed completely unbreakable for years was just gone. It wasn't a slow-motion fall from power, it was a political earthquake. And that unbelievable speed is what makes this whole story so fascinating.
And look, this wasn't some new, shaky government. This collapse came after 17 long years of what people there called political musical chairs. You know the deal. The same old faces just kept swapping positions of power, while the country's real problems just got worse. For nearly 2 decades, nothing really changed. And then, in just 2 days, absolutely everything did.
So that's the billion-dollar question, right? How on earth did this actually happen? Well, it turns out it was a perfect storm. It was ignited by two groups that, on the surface, couldn't be more different. On one side, you have the young, tech-savvy generation obsessed with the future, and on the other, a powerful nationalist movement trying to bring back the past.
So first up, let's talk about the Zen-Zs. That's the nickname for Nepal's Generation Z. And we're not talking about a small fringe group here. We're talking about a massive demographic tidal wave that had just had enough.
Just look at the sheer numbers here. Zen-Zs make up almost a third of the entire country. That's 9.2 million people who grew up with the internet in their pockets, who saw the world in a completely different way than the people in power. They weren't just a voting bloc. They were this huge, untapped force just waiting for a reason to mobilize.
And this right here, this gets to the absolute core of their frustration. On one hand, 85% of them own a smartphone. So they're incredibly connected, they're aware of global trends, they've got digital skills. But on the other hand, a crushing 20% youth unemployment rate. They had all the tools for a 21st century life, but were stuck in an economy that gave them no opportunities.
So what do you think they did? They used the tools they knew best. They'd scroll through Instagram and see the kids of the political elite flaunting this insane wealth, and it just fueled their rage. But here's the critical part. They didn't just get mad online. They got organized. They built this massive 100,000-plus member server on Discord, planning and coordinating completely out of sight of the old political guard.
Now, at the very same time this is all happening, a totally different revolutionary movement was building steam. While the Zen-Zs were dreaming of a digital future, the Rashtra Banau movement, which means let's build the nation, was fighting to reclaim the past. They're the other half of this incredible story.
Now, this movement is led by a really magnetic and, frankly, controversial guy named Durga Prasai. And his backstory is just fascinating. He's a businessman who used to support the very same Maoists who got rid of the monarchy. But now, he's leading the charge to bring the monarchy back. This huge ideological flip allowed him to connect with this deep sense of frustration from people who felt the country had lost its identity. So what did they actually want? Well, their demands were all about national identity, not digital rights. They wanted to restore Nepal as a Hindu state and bring back the king under a constitutional monarchy, two things that were central to the country's identity before they were abolished in 2008. And they mixed that nostalgia with really popular ideas like cracking down on corruption and forgiving citizen loans. It was a powerful cocktail.
So you've got these two huge, separate rivers of frustration flowing at the same time. All it took was one single spark to make them overflow. And in September of 2025, the government gave it to them.
And here it is, the government's huge, fatal error. They banned 26 of the biggest social media platforms on Earth. The official reason? Some bureaucratic nonsense about a failure to register. But to the Zen-Zs, this wasn't about paperwork. It was a declaration of war. The government had just unplugged their entire world, their communities, their businesses, and most importantly, their main tool for organizing. The explosion was immediate. On September 6th, the Zen-Zs flooded the streets. At the exact same time, Durga Prasai's movement called its own supporters out. The government was caught completely off guard, totally overwhelmed. Within 24 hours, things turned violent. By day 2, the Parliament and Supreme Court were literally on fire. And by the morning of September 8th, it was all over. The Prime Minister resigned.
But that incredibly fast victory came at a serious cost. During that chaotic 48-hour period, 72 people lost their lives. That number is a really stark reminder that this wasn't some peaceful, neat transition of power.
It was a violent, desperate uprising that showed just how fragile that old system really was.
So, the revolution worked. The old guard is out. But that leaves this massive question hanging in the air. What now? You've got these two groups who won together, but who want fundamentally different things. Can the digital innovators and the cultural traditionalists actually build a new country together? Well, their answer is this thing they're calling the Synergy Roadmap. And it's a really bold, fascinating attempt to find some common ground. The core idea is to try and take the best from both worlds, to use the Zen-Zs' tech skills and future-focused vision to power a culturally proud and revived Nepal.
And this isn't just talk. They have some really specific ideas. Let's take the economy. The Zen-Z solution is all about the future. Tax-free income for online freelancers and nationwide 5G internet. Rashtra Banau solution looks to the past, boosting cultural and religious tourism. The synergy? It's genius. What if the Zen-Zs use their tech skills to build, say, virtual reality tours of ancient temples? You create this brand new digital cultural export. It's all about finding that overlap. So their whole vision really boils down to 4 big moves. First, build that hybrid digital and cultural economy. Second, overhaul the government by bringing young people into power, but also settle that national identity question once and for all. Third, a huge economic shift focused on creating jobs and stamping out corruption. And finally, repositioning Nepal's role on the world stage.
And the goals they're setting for themselves are, well, they're incredibly ambitious. They want to cut youth unemployment from 20% down to 8% by 2030. They want to almost double the country's GDP growth. And they want to take digital exports from $200 million a year to $1 billion. The stakes couldn't be higher, but hey, neither could the potential rewards.
And that brings us to the final critical question. Is this unbelievable alliance in Nepal a new blueprint for the future? A way to actually merge progress and tradition? Or are the deep differences between the digital-first Zen-Zs and the pro-monarchy nationalists just a ticking time bomb? A fault line destined to crack this new nation apart? That is the grand experiment the entire world is now watching.